I want to turn it
Dawn,
off.
no, you can keep it on. Dawn can mute it until you're ready to talk.
Right, no, we'll be official.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, I think we'll get started. Thank you for coming this evening. I'm Susan Saunders. I'm the Voter Service Director of the League of Women Voters, and this is Peggy Leach, our president. The League of Women Voters was created nearly 100 years ago, like 98 years ago in 1920, when women won the right to vote. And the League was designed to be able to educate voters so that they could make an informed decision when they were looking at their ballots instead of just guessing or just guessing by party or whatever. And it was not only for the education of women, it was for education of everyone in the community and to begin to engage community members in local government. So I haven't been doing this for 98 years, but it feels close to it sometimes. The League of Women Voters of Boulder County is 80-something. It started in 1931. Originally it's gone through different names, but about 10 years ago it joined with the League from Longmont and became the Boulder County League, and we try to serve the county as a whole. So that's our history. We are going to start with state ballot issues tonight, since there's 13 of those, and we'll get through those, and then you may still have some attention span left for the county and the city of Longmont. All right. Shall I start?
Yes.
Okay. Amendments to the Constitution, which have letters next to them, like V, W, X, Y, Z, are amendments that are referred to the public by the legislature. They're referred to the ballot that way. The ones that have numbers come from citizen initiatives and get on the ballot that way. Amendments differ from propositions because propositions are changes to state statute and not to the state constitution. So we have a little of everything tonight to work on. The very first one is Amendment V. That's a V, not a Roman numeral 5. And it's about lowering the age requirement to serve in the state legislature. Currently in Colorado, you have to be 25 before you can run for representative or senator in the state of Colorado.
Can you speak a little louder, please?
Sure.
Okay.
This amendment is asking to lower the eligible age for people to run for state legislature from 25 down to 21. So it's a pretty straightforward amendment. If you have questions, please ask them, but this one I'm not sure it has, many subtle, things about it. In fact, please ask questions anytime that we're talking. Don't save it up to the end. Okay.
All right, my turn. Can everybody hear us?
I can hear you. You're muted a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we do have a microphone that maybe we can use. Well, for now, I'll just do mine. So I'm on Amendment W, which is on page 8. And that's to change the ballot format for the judicial retention elections. So we have the judicial retention questions all the time, and usually every one of them says, should we retain so-and-so, yes or no? Should we retain so-and-so, yes or no? This would change it to where it would have them in categories by type of judge, like appeals judge or district judge or whatever. Then it would say, shall we retain the following district judges? And then by each judge, it would say yes or no, so that it shortens the ballot somewhat and makes it to where it doesn't keep asking that same question over and over. So it doesn't change anything about the way we retain about the way we vote on the judges. It's just that the ballot format would change.
No questions? Okay, Amendment X has to do with the definition of industrial hemp. Back when we passed Amendment 64 and legalized recreational marijuana in addition to medicinal marijuana, they built into the Constitution the definition of industrial hemp so that it's distinguished from the more mind-bending drugs. And so people in the state of Colorado, farmers, could get permission from the federal government to actually grow industrial hemp. And that's a critical thing, is how it's defined. Currently, the Colorado Constitution definition of industrial hemp is the same as the federal definition of industrial hemp. This would take the definition out of the Constitution, and then if the federal government were to change the definition, we could, by state law, which is an easier fix than the Constitution, change our definition to keep in line with the federal one. Some of the con statements have to do with protecting our our definitions so that we can continue to grow industrial hemp in the state. There is some indication, some people believe that the federal government is getting ready to crack down on all hemp products, both recreational, medicinal, and industrial. And so there's a question of whether keeping it in the Constitution protects the state of Colorado or whether it's not necessary to keep it there. Some of the people who are on the pro side of this say, in order for the farmers always to be in compliance and selling what it's constituted as industrial hemp, we need to be able to essentially float that definition. Every time the federal definition changes, Colorado should be able to change the law instead of their constitution to change it and keep it aligned federally. Questions about that?
No.
Yes, start with her.
How can there be a federal policy if it's against the U.S. law?
Well, industrial hemp is a controlled substance outside of the state of Colorado and within other states that have the right, have excluded it. My understanding is that constitutionally, the U.S. was set up to believe in states' rights. So your state constitution holds sway, which is why I think they put it in in our Constitution in the first place. But I'm not absolutely positive about that. I believe that in the, never mind, it's not in the Blue Book. I was just about to say it's in the Blue Book, but it's not. So, yes.
I would be in favor of allowing Colorado to do what it needs to do to maintain the production of hemp as we apparently want it.
Right.
And I am confused as to whether voting yes on this will allow that. Jeff Sessions, forget it. We've got 2 years of him, and who knows what's going to happen. I don't know. I'm confused whether I should vote yes or no. My goal is to make it easier for Colorado to thwart what Jeff Sessions thinks is a terrible thing to do.
Okay.
And I don't know whether yes or no is the way to do that. This is very confusing to me.
Right. I would say that we don't know exactly either. Right now, it is legal to grow industrial hemp in Colorado. So as the federal regulation stands now.
If the definition becomes what Jeff Sessions wants it to be, it could become illegal. How do we thwart that if we change the definition to match the federal definition?
I don't know.
I don't know whether this should be yes or no. I don't know what to do.
Right. Do you have a better understanding?
Well, not really about, first of all, industrial hemp is not the same as pot.
Right.
We don't need to know that.
Right.
But it sounds like what we're saying is, should the federal government or Jeff Sessions change the definition, then the state could quickly pass a law through the legislature to conform with that.
If we vote yes on it.
Yes.
But if it's in the Constitution, you have to go through this whole thing of getting the
Constitutional
Constitutional
amendment.
amendment.
That's
on the
what I
ballot.
thought.
Right.
But so feeling the way we do, yes is a better vote.
I think so, and to me, it's always better when you can take something out of the realm of constitutional amendment
Yes.
and put
Correct.
it into the hands of the legislature, because our poor Constitution is already an absolute
Right.
Rubik's Cube.
And the Constitution now requires a 55% majority to make a change to it, so,
If you can even get it on the ballot.
right.
So just because it goes to a statute instead of in the Constitution, doesn't mean that the legislature would necessarily change the definition to match the federal. They just could if they wanted to.
Right.
But I think the legislature knows what we want, so hopefully they would do what their constituents want.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm licensed in the state of Texas, not Colorado, but I would make a comment.
Good.
The problem we have is that you've got a federal law that makes hemp and any type of cannabis project illegal.
Controlled substance.
Illegal.
It's a controlled
Well,
substance.
it's an illegal controlled substance.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it is, actually. And so whatever we do in Colorado, you still have that same problem. I think the argument for keeping in the Constitution is you have a stronger argument based on the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which allows states to make their own laws.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily prevent the Colorado law from being challenged, because Jeff
Correct.
Sessions or whoever could say, wait a minute, you're violating federal Controlled Substances Act. They haven't done that, but they're certainly concerned about that. So,
Right. Good, thank
the
you.
point about
That's
the
a better
legislature,
explanation.
You're exactly right. The legislature doesn't have to, this passes, the legislature doesn't have to change the definition at all. It
Right.
could, and I guess some people who are proponents would suggest, well, if the federal laws become more permissive concerning hemp or any other cannabis product in the future, then you could replicate that in the state
Easily.
law. More easily than
Right.
changing the Constitution.
Right.
That gives you the option to do it. Well, then but you also have to worry, I mean, if you're satisfied that the Colorado legislature is going to do the right thing.
Whatever that is. Right, right. Okay. You have another
One
comment,
quick
question?
comment is that the national trend seems to be going toward legalization
Right.
and toward taxation to get income for other states. So this may not be as big a problem as we think. It's probably going to go the right way anyway.
Right. All right. Good discussion. Yes.
What exactly is industrial hemp?
It
Are we
is,
talking about like rope or, fabric? Or-
yes,
or-
exactly.
And, okay, now, so at this point, because of it's allowed for research purposes federally. So at this point, there is a consensus among federal and state as to industrial hemp, but it could change on a federal level, and
Correct.
in which case, if it was on the constitutional statute in Colorado, that would actually have more weight against any revision on the federal level, wouldn't it?
That's the argument.
That's the argument.
It would actually, instead of being reactive to the federal, it would actually predicate the federal, keeping it legal.
Right, except we don't know if then it would create a conflict about whose law holds sway.
Well, traditionally,
Against-
don't the states have the sway?
Traditionally,
It's
yes.
constitutional?
Yes.
Or does it lose weight once it becomes statutory?
We need a Supreme Court justice here.
Right, right. Thank you. That's a question, and we honestly don't know the answer to it. So,
Yeah, I don't know if you can get it from reading the Blue Book, if you can get more from that, because it's much more detailed than these are.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
I mean, we could also be talking about, don't they make birdseed or something from that stuff too?
Yes. Yeah, hemp, industrial hemp goes into a lot of things. It's a great product. And Colorado is one of the largest producers of it in the U.S. So it's a boon to our economy.
Do y'all know whether or not the hemp
Actually, I've seen hemp producers on both sides in, like letters to the editor and stuff where you're only dealing with one person. So that hasn't helped me to understand it.
All right, well, so let's go on to Y and Z. And so that's on page 12 of this book. And I always talk about both of these at the same time. So they're related to the census and gerrymandering and redistricting. So every 10 years, our nation takes a census, and that's a count of everyone living in the United States. And then based on those population numbers, new lines are drawn for our political districts so that we'll be properly represented in Congress and in our legislature. So this process of redrawing the maps is called redistricting. And often during this process, gerrymandering occurs. That's when elected officials or political parties draw the maps to their advantage, or sometimes it occurs to limit the voices of minority communities. So amendments Y and Z, and I always talk about them together, they're an attempt to make the redistricting process more fair. So the most common question I hear is, why are there two amendments? Amendment Y considers the redistricting process for our federal congressional districts, and that's currently controlled by our state legislature. And Amendment Z relates to our state legislative districts. That's currently handled by a commission that's appointed by politicians and appointed judges. And basically, pretty much whoever has the governorship is kind of has the advantage on that one. So other than that difference, the amendments are essentially the same. So they each would set up an independent commission to draw the lines. Each commission would be made up of 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 4 unaffiliated voters. Colorado is currently made up of approximately 1.2 million unaffiliated voters and about 1 million each of Democrats and Republicans. So it's kind of a third, a third, a third, and that's the way the commission would be. The commissioners cannot have been paid lobbyists, elected officials, or party officials during the prior 3 years before the commission is selected. So the process of selecting these commissioners tries to ensure that Colorado's geographic and demographic diversity is represented on the commission. Once they're selected, their work has to be done in open meetings and according to open records laws. And any maps voted on by the commission have to have 8 votes out of the 12 commissioners. And of those 8, 2 have to be unaffiliated voters. Unaffiliated commissioners. So this means that the commission can't just split 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans and just kind of agree to split the state in half. The unaffiliateds need to have a voice in that too. So let's see. So the maps are first proposed by a nonpartisan legislative staff. And then anyone throughout the state can submit comments or even maps to the commission for consideration. And there are various criteria specified for the map drawing process, including, of course, equal population in each district, reasonable preservation of political subdivisions, such as cities and counties, compactness, and protecting communities of interest. Communities of interest are groups of individuals with common interests, such as water, transportation issues, geographic areas, also minority groups. And the minority groups are also protected by following the Voting Rights Act. So after all these other criteria have been met, they then call for competitive districts, if possible. So currently, like on our congressional districts, we have 7 congressional districts, and only 1 is competitive. That's Mike Kaufman's district. So every year, there's a big race there. And all the other ones, basically whoever wins in the primary will win in November. So we're hoping for some more competitive districts so that the politicians will need to talk to their whole district and not just to their base. So then, after they submit the maps, they have to hold at least 3 hearings in each of the 7 congressional districts before the maps are finalized. So that's 21 public hearings. It's all shared online. They were referred to the voters unanimously by the Colorado legislature. And so that says something, because the legislature is currently in control of some of this, and they don't want to be anymore. They just voted 100 to nothing to say, let's put these on the ballot and let the citizens decide. So since there are amendments to the Constitution, 55% of the vote is needed to pass them. So are there questions on these 2 amendments? All right.
It's an easy crowd. All right, this brings us to Amendment A. We've gone the whole alphabet over the past few years, and we're back to A. This amendment is to prohibit slavery or indentured servitude in any form whatsoever. Currently, the Colorado Constitution allows slavery or indentured servitude in the case of a punishment for crimes. And this amendment is saying it's time to take that out of our Constitution. We should not allow it under any circumstances. Excuse me?
Like prisoners in the prison system?
Yeah, prisoners in the prison system are the ones that come up as the test case for this amendment. Does this mean that we get rid of work release, or does this mean that prisoners no longer work in jobs in the prison itself? It does not mean that. This is simply saying you can't put a person under the conditions of slavery or indentured servitude under any circumstances in the state of Colorado. When the 13th Amendment went into play, which has this language in it for the country, about half of the states at the time added it to their own constitution. The other half did not. If Colorado passes this amendment, it will be the first state to take it back out of their constitution and say, no slavery, no servitude, no matter what. So that's what you're deciding on this issue. Any questions about that?
Definition again? Of
Slavery
and
Okay, slavery involves ownership of a person.
ownership.
Indentured servitude involves a debt, some kind of contract between the person who's the servant and the person who's in charge. So it's generally a payback for a debt.
So how would this affect things like work programs in prisons, where people learn skills or they have work release?
Those would continue to exist. Some of the unknowns have to do with whether they become eligible for minimum wage, or they become able to unionize within the prison, or those sorts of things. And we don't know whether that can happen or not. But approving this does not just eliminate the ability to have work in prison or work release programs. So it doesn't take those away.
Are there some examples of this, which has resulted in this amendment, that you can tell us?
Examples of slavery or
There
servitude?
are a number of them that
I don't know of any.
There are a number of arrests that have been made where they found workers that have been kept in basements or whatever, that work for hotels, they work for restaurants, Chinese restaurants, whatever, and they work there, they sleep downstairs, they're paying off their travel to the States. They have nothing that they have nothing. They're slaves.
Correct. Okay.
That's part of it.
That's true. But that could happen no matter what because it's not an issue of they're being punished for a crime. That's the thing that we're eliminating. It's still illegal.
It is still
Or
legal,
it's already illegal.
but depending on how you go in the books, it depends on how you can charge it.
I follow you. Okay. Anything else? Okay.
All right, Amendment 73 on page 21. And this is funding for public schools. So as far as what it's raising the money for, it's for pre-primary, primary, and secondary education, not colleges. It directs the revenue to increase the per pupil spending from this year by 7.8% if it would pass. And then it will fully fund kindergarten and increase funds for special education and gifted and talented, low-income programs, etc. So these additional funds that it would collect, and I'll tell you how we collect them in a minute, these additional funds are to supplement what we're already spending on education. So it's not supposed to replace what we're spending. We're currently almost $1 billion behind on our constitutional obligations per Amendment 23, which required that we had to spend a certain amount of money on education, but during our recession 10 years ago, we didn't have enough money to do that, and so the legislature basically had to decide to not follow the Constitution and fund other things that they had to fund. And so the funding for education is behind. So this doesn't replace that. It's just in addition to what they're supposed to already be spending on education. So the way that it raises the money is by the income tax. So currently we pay 4.63% of federally adjusted gross income. And this would change it to where as you make more money, you pay a little higher percent. So incomes under $150,000, there will be no change. And then it will get up to, if you get up to $500,000 income, and this is for an individual, the rate would be 8.25%. So that's the highest it goes. And it raises the corporate tax rates to 6% instead of the 4.63%. So then here's the complicated part that I'll just admit I don't really understand very well. So has to do with the Gallagher Amendment that was passed in the 1980s and has all these formulas about property taxes, how much is paid by residential and how much is paid by commercial. So over the years, residential, back when this started, residential property tax was 29% of, based on 29% of your assessed value. It's now down to 7.2% of your assessed value, and the commercial taxes keep going up. So this would freeze it, basically. Well, okay, it will reduce the property tax rate on non-residential property. And remember, the corporations and all that are now having to pay 6% instead of 4.63%. So now this helps by reducing the property tax rate on the non-residential. And then it changes the tax rates for residential property. So right now it's 7.2%. It's slated to go to, I believe, 6.9%.
6.1.
6.1%. It's going to freeze it at 7.0% and just freeze it there instead of having it keep going down every year. So the residential will now be 7%. I think, well, I don't know. Are there any questions on that? Yeah.
What's the net increase in funding there? Is it
Oh.
that $750,000, $750 million gap?
It's not.
You're increasing tax rates at the state level, but lower with the property.
Oh, right. So there
What's
is,
the net benefit?
and I don't know that. It's probably in the blue book. I know.
Again, the question is, does it fill that hole, the $750 million hole?
Well, it's not supposed to. That hole is supposed to be filled anyway.
Okay.
And this is supposed
By
to
the
be in
general
addition
fund.
to that.
Right.
Yeah.
This is not meant to supplant the general fund, and the general fund's still behind, but perhaps gaining as we just get more revenue in
So it just
total.
directs this new money has to be spent on education?
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
And not to fill the hole and not on other things. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yes.
And some of this money is spent on illegal alien children?
Pardon?
Here. Is some of this money to be spent on illegal alien children removal?
Well, it doesn't direct it specifically. I mean, it just however it is now, it would be
It's
still
funding for public schools.
Yeah.
So yes, you have
right.
Okay. But that includes
immigrant children.
kindergarten too.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. You have a question.
Is this a Band-Aid because of the Tabor Amendment limitations that don't allow us to recover when there's a recession, such that we're putting in some sort of locked-in money to try to make up a shortfall that I didn't know we could even get away with? Is this going to have unintended consequences like the Tabor Amendment in ways that we didn't see? Is this, I don't like earmarking in a general way, because we don't know what's going to happen. The need is now, but what happens in 10 years? Do you know that answer?
Well, so I have my own opinion, but I
we don't
but
share
don't
that.
think I'm really going to tell you that. I mean, you know, how do we know? In my opinion, well, I'm not going to say. It's an opinion.
Technically, yes, you're setting some rates, some tax rates in the Constitution. Yeah, this is an amendment. So, yes, that could cause us trouble down the line. And if we needed to change those rates, we would have to have an amendment to change those rates. However, if you look at Colorado's education funding, it's so far in the hole based on so many different actions in the past that anything you do to try to improve it looks like a big deal. And, you know, possibly another disaster like Tabor. But because of Tabor, you have to do the Band-Aids.
Is this, could also this be a limit to underfund 10 years from now? If you set a limit, a level, could we be actually worse off in 10 years because we set a level now?
Yes, we could, definitely. And
Do you mean
we
on the,
could
you mean on the
be,
property tax? Is that what you mean?
I'm saying that
our education needs keep going like this,
Oh,
and we
right.
set our tax at this rate, and it doesn't bring in enough revenue 10 years from now. So we'd be sitting here talking to each other about the next amendment to raise the limit, or an amendment to take the limit out of the Constitution and do it statutorily.
it's just too bad it's not a statutory thing that could be changed by the legislature.
Right. I believe that what we find is the legislative
Doesn't work.
funding has not worked well enough. It's another source of Band-Aid, and we're so far in the hole that something more drastic needs to be done, at least to sort of de-Gallagherize education funding. Because it's the Gallagher Amendment that made the property tax ratchet down while other revenue sources came in, and that has been to the detriment of our school systems.
This has helped. I still don't know what to do, but this has helped.
Okay.
Well, you know, another perspective is that here in St. Vrain and Boulder Valley school districts, our voters quite often vote to increase our mill levy. And so we're not in as bad a straits as some of these rural districts that we've got that don't have a lot of people that can raise the taxes and all that. So it's a way of helping the whole state.
Right. There's some very good charts in the Blue Book. It's one of the sections of the Blue Book I highly recommend sitting with a cup of tea or a glass of wine and studying. That give you an idea of what's going to happen with your own taxes, which is what a lot of people base their overall decision on, is how does this impact my property tax. And they're really good charts to show you what the relative impact would be for you. And that might help. Yes?
Is there ever a situation where, you know, the law said, okay, we're going to raise taxes for education, and then somehow the state ends up using it for something else? Does that ever occur, or is it, when it's earmarked, it's earmarked? Or is that not the case? They say, well, we really need more over here, and let's just take it from, does that ever happen? Does that happen?
Yes.
Well, I can't think that it has. I mean, how many taxes have we raised since Tabor? Statewide. Cigarette tax and marijuana tax, I think, are the only things we've passed statewide.
City of Boulder, sugar taxes.
Well, that's city, but I mean,
Yeah.
statewide, since Tabor has been passed, we've passed 2 statewide taxes. One on cigarettes, one on marijuana. So
They were
it's hard to,
earmarked for a particular purpose.
like the marijuana, I believe 40 million was earmarked for education, and the rest could go to the general fund. So the 40 million is going to education. I'm not sure about the cigarette tax.
I don't know about the cigarette tax. But yes, it happens that you begin to have to shift. And even as Peggy said at the beginning, because during the recession we couldn't even meet our amended or set limits, it shifted then. They chose not to fully fund education in order to take care of other things that needed to be done. So it's sometimes a moving target no matter what. You know, we don't live in a perfect world, unfortunately. So. Other questions? All right. We'll move on to Amendment 74. What? Yikes. Yeah. Okay, this has to do with fair compensation for the reduction in fair market value because of any governmental law or regulation. Currently in the state of Colorado, we work with eminent domain, which means if your property is taken essentially or rendered virtually useless, you have the right to claim compensation. So for instance, if the highway wants to take a piece of your property and widen the road or put an exit ramp in, they can take that property and pay you for it, whatever the fair market value is. Whether or not you think that's the fair market value, but there's a method for setting that. So that's a process that we have. This amendment is seeking to expand that process. Essentially, any time any regulation would, in your mind, lower the value of your property, you could sue the regulatory agency, whether it's the city or the town or it's the EPA, whoever messes with your property value. This also applies to mineral rights, which are considered property. And so people have talked about this being an oil and gas thing. You could sue if you thought your property value went down. The oil and gas company could also sue if they thought their mineral rights had been reduced in value for something like, for instance, a setback rule. Okay, so at this point is when I tell people the state of Oregon put a law like this, or an amendment like this in place, I don't know what year. They lasted 3 years and they repealed it because they had so much work going on in the courts. They had tied up the courts entirely with suits and countersuits and personal lawsuits and corporate lawsuits that they stymied their entire government, and so they repealed the law. That's one real life example of what this can do. So,
My question is,
yes.
what's behind this? Because we already have in the Constitution a provision that you have to be compensated. So
Correct.
What is this supposed to do that's better for people? Does anyone know?
I believe it's presented as to be better because you don't have to have your total value taken away. You might still have a ranch or a farm, even though somebody's drilling on it, and you could be raising cattle or hemp or whatever. And yet you could still say my property value went down, the market value of my property went down because there's an oil rig allowed nearby. Okay, so we.
So in the blue book, it says, current law does not require government to compensate an owner unless the loss in value is near total.
Right. So that's the thing. Eminent domain is, this makes it virtually worthless. This is saying, well, if it's degraded a little bit, you know, somebody moves in next door and you don't like what they built, you could sue because they were allowed to build this tall building or whatever right next to your house, and you don't like that, and you think it lowered your property value. So it opens the gates wide open for all sorts of lawsuits. Yes?
Do people generally, in the state generally, feel that the process for evaluating the market, fair market price is a good one or not? You frown.
I don't know the answer to it, that's why I'm frowning.
Do you know the answer to that? Because there are places in the state where maybe the market keeps going up.
Right.
There may be a process that downgrades it, so what's your recourse? Take it or leave it, you know? No recourse.
Right, I know what you're asking.
In other places, people have the opportunity to challenge things.
Well, and we do, for instance, when you get your property valuation, if you don't like it and you think it's not based on good reasoning or equal, you know, like properties, there is a process to go to your assessor and say, I'm objecting, let's have a look at this, and come up with a case to say that they misassessed your property. So yes, that already exists. Whether or not we think the basis that the assessor uses is a good basis or not, that I don't know.
So is it based on an the assessor's value in his process or its process?
Well, I think this is saying fair market value, right?
Fair market value would be,
Determined by who?
don't know. I don't know how that
Tax
gets
assessor?
determined.
I'm just curious.
Well, the assessor sets a property value that's typically lower than
Yeah.
the market value. Okay, so again, I don't really know how to answer. Your question is the assessment or the setting of fair market value a fair process? Don't know. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think those in favor of this is mostly oil and gas money, and not just from Colorado, but from all around, because they see Colorado might very well pass Amendment 112, and they want to be allowed to sue for the loss of those minerals.
Could be. And we do have a list of opposition, pros and cons, who provided the pros and cons.
I think, given current laws, probably, you know, can justify the loss, and then you'll have to get an attorney and whatever. But I think of all those stores on, is it Pearl? I haven't been here long enough, where they gave an exemption to the height rule. And so all those apartments and buildings now that used to look at the Flatirons can't see them anymore. I don't know if any of them sued or what, you know, if that's a loss of property value or whatever. But I'm really worried about oil and gas suing that we will all pay for, because I feel that Amendment 112 will pass in the state.
Right.
And they want to be able to sue.
This does change things so that any regulatory agency of any kind, whether it's health and safety or property, whatever, would set up the situation that people could sue.
They'll be the taxpayers to pay for it.
Yeah.
You know, I think the other side of it though is, in the example you just gave is a good one about a local ordinance on building heights.
Right.
That also goes through a public process.
True.
And, you know, there's the people on both sides, and, you know, sometimes you lose process. I guess this is setting up potential more lawsuits. if
Right.
We happen to lose at the local level because you disagree with an ordinance. And so,
Right.
so I guess my point is, at least there's community input when that ordinance is being debated.
Right.
So it's not like it's totally arbitrary.
something you
It's not
can
totally
do.
arbitrary by
Mhm.
local governments to pass some ordinance now.
Correct.
If you lose, you're upset, you want to sue, but
Correct.
Well, I keep looking at it as, can the government officials win either way? I mean, if they approve a limit on building heights, then the people that don't like that can sue. And if they don't approve a limit, and so now you can build as much as you want, well, then the neighbors are gonna sue, because, you know, so, to me, it's either side. I do have a list of who was for and against. So in favor was the Committee for Colorado's Shared Heritage, the Colorado Farm Bureau, the State Ballot Issues Committee, which is Douglas Bruce, and then opposed was Save Our Neighborhoods and the Colorado Municipal League were against it.
Those names mean nothing because they come up with names
I know.
to make them sound good.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't they go?
Yeah. Right.
A couple of Sundays ago, when we were here,
I think some of those farmers that use the farm television, my personal
like 10%
opinion,
oil and gas
are
were bad.
organized in oil and gas to go on TV.
Right.
that the rest was oil and
Yeah.
gas, and the first 10% were farm bureau, and the rest, the other 90% were oil and gas.
Right.
Like, put it
So
in
shall we move on?
Move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
We haven't resolved.
75, Amendment 75, which is campaign contributions, page 27. So this is for if any candidate gives $1 million or more to their own campaign, then the opponents in that campaign can raise 5 times as much money as they could have. So I'll just give an example. For the Colorado House, the limit that anybody can contribute to a House candidate is $400. Okay, so, but if one of the House candidates' opponent gave $1 million to their own campaign, then this House candidate could now raise $2,000 contributions, which is 5 times as much, instead of only $400 at a time.
It's not 5 million.
Not 5
Not
million,
5
no. Now, the person that gave the $1 million is also able to increase their contribution amounts too by the 5%, by the 5 times. So, in the case of governor, I believe the limit is $1,150. And so if you multiply that times 5, that'd be, $5,600, $5,700 that somebody could raise for a governor candidate.
That one individual could give.
That
That one individual could give, excuse me, yeah, right. All right, any questions on that one? Okay,
This is not saying anything about corporations. This is all about individuals.
right.
Or corporations, individuals in the text here.
In Colorado, I don't believe corporations can give to candidates. They can give to issues. Let me just find it here. This proposal does not allow corporate contributions.
No, but they can give it to PACs,
Right,
who in turn can
Right.
spend it on anybody. It's not a
Right.
specific contribution to Joe Schmo. It's-
right.
Right.
But if
so
I
they
were a
can-
candidate,
They can give a whole lot of money.
yeah, exactly, but not
Just
directly
goes
to the
a
candidates.
third party.
Uh-huh,
This does not
right.
address any of that.
Doesn't
Correct.
address that, no.
No, it's
No.
just a whole lot of money for everybody.
So how
Right.
does the league view, like an issue like the need for comprehensive campaign finance reform? And you have something like this, it's like just trying to jimmy with one little part of it with set amounts of money and rules that really doesn't deal with the big problem. So how does the league view that in terms of, is this a step in the right direction, or should we just say no and
Okay.
put our money somewhere else?
So here's the thing. We can answer that question after we close this meeting and open a new meeting. We're a nonprofit, And under tax code, et cetera, we have to separate our educational aspects from our advocacy aspects. We can do both. We can't do them at the same time.
Well done.
So as soon as we're done talking about here's what this is and what it means, then we'll say goodnight and then say, oh, hello, and talk to you about the league's viewpoint on things. Okay?
That's separation there, I like that.
All right. So, moving on, we are now into the propositions, and these are the things that change our statutory situation and not our constitution. Did I turn too many pages?
No, is it no, 109 I
I'm
think
good.
is next.
Okay.
Yeah.
Suddenly. So, Proposition 109 and Proposition 110 both deal with transportation spending. And I'll talk about them together in a way because they contrast with each other, but they're both about ways to fund transportation, maintenance, repairs, actual construction for the state of Colorado. 109 proposes no tax increases of any kind. It proposes to take existing general fund revenues as they come in each year and put those towards the repayment of a bond and the interest on that bond, but to at least sell bonds in order to raise money to do construction projects. You kind of need a big lump of money up front. The repayment of that bond, according to this amendment, will supersede anything else that general fund revenue is to go towards. This includes education, Medicare or Medicaid, prisons, anything that the general fund currently supports will be secondary to the payment of the bond and interest for this construction. This 109 also limits the spending, the expenditure of the bond money to the 66, I think it is, 65 or 66 identified projects that are currently on the CDOT website. So you can go and see what roads and bridges they want to fix or repair or replace or things they want to add. And it will be totally under their control, and that's the only thing it can go to. It cannot go to alternative transportation or multimodal projects. So this is where 110 comes in, and 110 says, let's raise a sales tax in order to provide revenue to do some road repairs and construction expansions that are needed. It dictates the percentage of that money that would be brought in by the tax that goes to statewide projects, some of those that are on CDOT's list. How much money goes to local entities to deal with and choose the transportation project in their area that they think need the most attention or first attention. And 15% has to be spent on alternative transportation projects of whatever kind. It is a sales tax. Generally, we think of sales taxes as regressive. However, it's considered less regressive than a gasoline tax, which more targets people in rural areas that have to drive further, or the poor who have to drive to get to work and can't necessarily really manage that added tax at the pump. Whereas a sales tax, technically we have a little control over what we buy. And things like food, drugs, other essentials are exempt from this added sales tax. So it's trying to design itself to protect that. The additional reasoning behind a sales tax, according to the writers of the proposition, are that visitors to the state who use our roads and contribute to the degradation also pay sales tax on hotels and restaurants and ski tickets or whatever. And so everybody using the roads would have some input into this or responsibility for the money needed to repair them. So that's the two ballot issues. I'll save you raising your hand. One of the first questions that always comes up is, what if both of these pass? Right? So there's sort of limited experience with this, but the alternatives are that the legislature decides what to do, and they may take the issue that got the majority, the highest majority. So if 109 gets more votes to pass it than 110 gets, 109 will take precedence and be the new law. Or they can work to blend them and take best or good agreed practices out of both of them and have almost a third or a revised transportation amendment, because they'll say, well, the majority of people in Colorado agreed we have to do something to fund transportation improvements and maintenance, but they weren't exactly agreed on what or how to do it, and the legislature would then decide how to do it.
And they are both statutory, so the legislature can,
right,
it's not in the Constitution.
Can change it again.
Bothering voting on it, if they can just decide haphazardly what they want to do with it.
Well, because they can't decide that. The voters have to vote
Right.
on
So
bonding
if
and
one
on.
passes, the legislature has to follow that mandate.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That's what I was looking at, thanks.
Right. So, 2 down,
Any questions on those?
2 to go.
Okay, let's see, 111, I skipped right by it. Oh, yeah. It's on page 36. Limitation on payday loans. So this would lower the finance charges on payday loans to no more than 36% annual percentage rate. So currently, I believe payday loans are authorized to charge up to 200%. So that means that if you borrowed $100 to pay it back, you would have to pay $300. That's what 200% means. Our current average of payday loans is 129%. So, you know, a lot of payday loans don't charge the 200%. So, but we've got an average of 129%, which means that if people borrow $100, they're paying it back with $229. So this would lower that to say that if somebody borrows $100, the most they have to pay back is $136. Okay, any questions on that one?
It's the before that you didn't have taking these loans out till the end, right?
Right.
That's correct. At a previous presentation, I had the audience say, well, who would take out a loan that had that kind of rate? I said the people who can't qualify for any other kind of loan.
Yes.
And what happened is payday loans fell into a loophole in Colorado's usury laws, and so they're just out of control.
They went down.
This is a law to bring them into line with all the rest of the usury regulation.
Thank you.
Which brings us to Proposition 112, which has been hinted at earlier tonight. This is a proposition to increase the setback regulations for oil and natural gas development. If it's passed, any new oil or gas drilling operation would be required to be at least 2,500 feet from a building which has an occupancy code. So there would be a house, a school, a hospital, anything where it's occupied basically all the time. The ruling also applies to natural areas or protected areas, and things like drinking water supplies, parks, whole waterways, creeks and rivers, and it applies to the property that is not federally owned or controlled in the state of Colorado. Okay. So all the BLM land on the western slope does not fall under this or is not protected by this. but the territory around here would be. It also does not say, it says the oil and gas company cannot drill closer to your house than 2,500 feet, but it doesn't say you couldn't go out and build something close to an existing well. Why you would do that, we don't know, but it doesn't stop a developer, for instance, from putting something closer. So, questions? No? Okay.
All right.
I do have one question. The opponents say we'll put 85% of the state off limits to oil and gas development. Do y'all believe that? Is that accurate, or is that
It's not accurate, because we know they can drill sideways, right? Costs more money to drill sideways, but it's where the drill site is as compared to a building. So it doesn't necessarily eliminate the ability to get to the minerals underneath the place. Or as you say, the minerals are here in Colorado. So you don't just pick up and leave and go, oh, I'll go get minerals somewhere else, because they're here. So they will find a way to drill.
They're not legal to start.
So, all right. Do you want to stretch or anything? You've sat through 13 issues.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes left, and we have local issues. Who all lives anywhere besides Longmont? Where do you live? Boulder?
And where do you?
Louisville. Okay, Louisville doesn't have any ballot issues.
Erie? Okay.
Erie, and I don't think Erie does.
Right.
Okay.
Well, it may, but we didn't study them because most of Erie is not in the county, frankly.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
So we'll need to cover Boulder County, because I think everybody's in Boulder County, and there's one issue for Boulder County, which is 1A, and it is, so it's extending an existing tax. However, the existing tax is not for this purpose. So the new purpose is for an alternative sentencing facility and jail modernization. So it's 0.185% countywide tax. And it was passed in, I believe, 2014 to repair a lot of the damage from the 2013 floods. So we approved that for 5 years, and it will expire at the end of 2019. So now the county is proposing that we extend that existing tax, only change it to be funding this jail modernization. So a lot of that is to deal with mental illness and a greater number of female inmates and just all kinds of things that have changed over the years since the jail was originally built more than 30 years ago. Anybody have any questions about that one? Yeah.
Is this saying that jails are going to be expanded to put mentally ill people there because they have nowhere else to put them?
No. It's saying that there will be an alternative facility instead of putting them in jail, to put them in an alternative facility where they can.
More students.
We currently have an alternative sentencing program that works for minor infractions and for people with behavioral health problems that have gotten sucked into the criminal system.
Yep.
So some of this money is designed to expand that alternative sentencing program and to manage the jail population that's currently in it in its own facility instead of sharing with the current county jail.
This is the DA following up on a dialogue earlier on. They were talking about this.
Right. So we already have this program. We want to expand the program. We want to create the facilities for the program. And by the way, the jail, which is 20 years old, wasn't designed to handle the population it has now. It was never designed to hold as many women as it has, and certainly not designed to hold as many mentally unwell people as it currently has. So, it's a,
Yes.
So I'm just curious as to why this is sort of piggybacking on the existing funding that was voted for the flood recovery instead of being presented as a new thing. Does anybody know?
So I have a theory, I don't know for sure.
right.
I think it has to do with Tabor. And so, you know, we could just stop this tax, and then we could have to vote on a new tax. And then when you do a new tax, you have to estimate how much it's going to collect in the first year. And then you have to deal with, well, if you collect more than that, then you have to have another election to decide what to do with that extra money, which is what's happening in Boulder with the sugar tax this year. So that's just my theory, is that it's easier to just extend an existing one instead of stopping one and then starting over again with all of the Tabor requirements that a new tax requires.
And they can say they're not raising taxes.
Right.
It's just reallocating it for a new use.
Yeah,
right.
That new term, repurposing, it applies to this.
Yeah.
And in the ordinances that the county commissioners brought this, you know, talked about this to put it on the ballot, they consider that by the end of 2019, which is another year from now, the flood recovery will be completed. All the projects that were necessary will have been taken care of. So, yeah. And generally it's easier to accept a tax that's just a continuation. You're already paying for it. You don't feel any pain, as opposed to stopping one and then starting up another. But that's our theory.
So we do Longmont next?
We'll do Longmont, since most of the audience is from Longmont. There are 3 bond issues. They all deal with city buildings, basically, that are in need of renovation, repair, replacement, relocation, in the case of one of the firehouses, I believe. And so they are asking the public's permission to sell bonds in order to raise the construction money in order to repair specific buildings. So issue 3A has to do with the Civic Center, the library, and the Justice Center. 3B has to do with 2 of the fire stations, fire station number 2 and 6. And then 3C has to do with the swimming pool and some work at the golf course.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have questions about this? Yes.
One, I think it's interesting they combined the golf courses, which serve only a small fraction of the people, with the pools that serve a lot more. But my question is if all 3 of these pass, how is the city going to pay off the bond, debt service and all those? Is it going to be a problem for the city to do that if all 3 pass at the same time, which is not likely?
I don't know, but I would say that will be in the county clerk's book that has to do with fiscal issues. So not the blue book, but the white one that you should have gotten.
This one here?
Where do you get that?
Oh, so you should have gotten that in the mail. It's from Boulder County.
See if this is in it, because that's a Tabor notice. Definitely deals with taxes. I think it deals with bond issues.
It deals with bonds also,
anything fiscal.
We got one like this in the mail from the city of Longmont.
Oh, that's the city put out. Okay, that would make sense.
Yes, and this is in there too. Yeah, so, I mean, I was reading this, and the comments about against was that the total is 53 million with these 3 bonds. And, you know, each one of them has their own different amount. So, the comments against it are, it obligates the Longmont taxpayers to pay principal and interest on possibly $53 million in bonds. But it doesn't say whether they can afford that or not.
That's the problem with it, and they present it, don't you love it, just like Amendment 109. Without raising any taxes or da-da-da-da-da, do you want to do such and such? Well, sure, but then you gotta read the fine print.
Yeah, how many
I don't
people-
know, where's $53 million going to come from?
The sale of
And that's
bonds.
just what they're borrowing.
Right, they're borrowing it,
The
right.
interest.
Right.
Right.
I personally am voting no, because they don't explain how it's going to be paid for.
And did it explain it in that city of Longmont? I don't live in Longmont, so I don't,
It
it
does
doesn't
not
explain it there either? Okay.
It's just,
Okay.
without raising taxes, do you want to improve the swimming pool? Sure. If you rob Peter to pay Paul, that sounds good, but at some point, you have to raise taxes to pay back Paul.
Right.
But there was
And
also
they don't
something in there
explain
that
it.
was mentioned of a previous bond issue that had been paid off. You know, that the city had
Okay.
borrowed something and now we paid it
No.
off. So, okay, let's look at the next cycle of what needs to be done.
Great.
Do the same process. So I don't know how they paid that part off, but I
Right.
Well, I
think they're
their
saying,
hope
okay,
is
now we're
even-
ready for another cycle.
In the hope is that, or the city's saying, well, we're gonna have economic growth, so we're gonna have more, we're not increasing the tax rates, but
Yeah, more
the amount of
revenue.
tax actually coming in
Will
as
increase.
the city gets larger, but that's an assumption that obviously
True.
we're making.
The other thing I would put forward too is when you're dealing with construction projects, it's like the road, you need a bunch of money all at once in a very short time frame. Bonds allow you to do that unless you have planned way out there and collected for 10 to 25 years and just kept setting aside tax money to then pay for a replacement building. That takes a lot of planning. Doesn't usually happen. One of your questions about lumping the pool and the golf course together is, when I look at this, I believe one of them is basically city government buildings, public buildings. The firehouses are a public safety unit, and then you have a recreational unit, and whatever came under recreation got lumped in there.
I have something to add here, and that is that if I understand this right, 3A is for the government buildings here, is a continuation of phase 1 that's already underway. And so in my mind, going to phase 2 makes more sense without thinking about it, because it's already started, than the other two that are new. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm afraid I don't know a whole lot
You
about
don't
it
know.
because I live in Louisville.
Neither one of
So,
us live here.
Yeah. Yeah.
We didn't think to study that part.
Fire
Yeah.
stations then, not knowing how they're going to pay back the golf course.
But in terms of what the amendments are asking, you all understand what they're asking you to approve or disapprove, right? So that's the goal. All right. That concludes our presentation on what's in your ballot. Thank you.
Turn off the cameras now and really tell us what's going on.
Right. And now, the quick and dirty answer is on Longmont, we're staying neutral. We're not recommending or opposing those bond issues. Okay?
And we are approving Boulder County.